What's up, guys? So I realized that I owe you guys a long overdue update on my buddy Newman's Common Rail Swap First Gen. I went back and watched all the videos so I could get caught up to speed on where we left off, and man, it's been a long time since we talked about it. We've been waiting on a lot of parts. As this post-COVID world is, there's a lot of things that are just hard to get, and we've had to kind of make some choices on some routes that we're going to go solely based on parts availability. Kind of sucks to do stuff like that, but it's the world we live in. So we've been kind of on hold on a few things. I didn't want to just put out a video that was kind of, you know, we did one or two little tasks. So I wanted to wait until we got a couple things done. And I realized that, man, we've got a lot done since that last video. So without further ado, let's just jump into talking about this thing, and I'll let you guys know what all I've done to it. So long time videos ago, you've seen I was mounting the intercooler, the radiator, all that stuff is 100% done now. So everything stayed the same as what I talked about in the previous videos. Just to catch up to speed, intercooler mounts into the bottom on that tube that I've made there. Ended up actually sleeving that tube and making it able to pin in. And the biggest reason I did that is so it's easier to pull the motor out. The goal with this whole apparatus was to make it as easy as possible for Jordan to work on it himself. And he requested that if possible, we'd be able to pull the motor without taking the hood off. So the bottom of the oil pan was super close to that mount there on the bottom. So with the hood open, I wasn't sure that he was going to be able to do that. So I made that removable, mainly to make it easy to get the engine in and out. What I didn't realize that it made it able to do is now you can actually pull the intercooler and radiator assembly without actually taking any bolts off. Once the core support's out of the way, we'll get into that in a second, but say if you were wanting to service something or address a leak, or who knows, work on something on the front of the engine, and you wanted all this crap out of here, you can actually, because of the way that the intercooler piping is vibrant clamped, you actually don't have to use any tools to take the intercooler and radiator out once this is out. You just pull those two pins and pull the pins at the bottom of the actual tubing here that holds everything together, and then this whole thing will just come out as an assembly. And then, of course, still doing the same design that we talked about originally, where the radiator comes out by itself. It'll have quick disconnects on the coolant lines, and then this just pins in. You can see that pin right there, and then you just slide this radiator right up out of it. And then the piping worked out awesome. So we were able to use every bit of the piping that came from JP's truck originally. This side was super simple. All we had to do was cut it in one spot and make one weld. Everything else was exactly the same. And we used our buddy Chris Maston to do the aluminum welding for us. Share the love to him. And then notched the core support here. I know it looks like, you know, why does it need to be notched this far over? And the reason for that is because if you notch this really tight to this, you'd never actually be able to get the intercooler piping in. You need to be able to swing it to get it in, so that's why this is notched so far over. And, you know, weight reduction. So same deal on this side, notched over so we can get the piping in. And then on this side, we did have to change one piece of the tubing. We had to do a new 45 tube here, as to where before, I think it was like a straight tube, because like I've said in the previous videos, this intercooler was a lot lower in JP's truck. So other than that though, all this other stuff stayed the same, and we were able to just add in this 145 tube, and it looks really nice, and it works really good, and everything fits. Clears the power steering pump. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, the power steering pump reservoir clears all that really nice, and just worked out really good. Really happy with the way that the intercooler piping and everything laid out in here. I know it might not look like it, but this was a lot of stuff to fit in this engine compartment. It definitely took a lot of planning. And then we decided on the idler. We decided to use a Cummins idler. I did some research and found out that on CP3 stuff that you don't want a mechanical tensioner. You actually need the tensioner to have some give in it. And you can't really see right now because there's so much stuff in here, but there's a machine spot on the front cover, and this idler pulley rides right in that machine spot perfectly. So we'll be able to do a really simple belt design. And then if for some reason he was ever at the track and this tensioner failed, instead of having some custom deal, he could just run to any parts store and pick up a Cummins tensioner for this thing. So that's really nice. That's something that a lot of people don't think about, is custom parts aren't always the way to go. Sometimes getting stuff that is readily available that you can go and get from a parts store, it will save you more times than what that custom piece is worth. Of course, there's situations where you have to have something custom, but anytime you can use an off-the-shelf part, it's usually to your benefit. And then to finish up the core support, because like you guys saw before in the previous videos, it's removable. So really simple, just did these aluminum plates that bolt in on each side, and then some nice stainless Allen head button bolts, and this core support just bolts in with these two bolts. So you just leave these bolts in at all times, and then if you want to pull the core support, just take these two bolts and these two bolts out, and then this one tab right here has a 1/4 bolt in it, and the center of your core support comes out. This ties everything together really nicely. It's good and strong. This is important that this was strong here because this is your hood latch area, so you don't want this to be weak at all, or it'll try to, you know, rip the hood open. And then the other nice thing about this setup is this is something that a lot of first gen people struggle with when you put a bigger intercooler in your truck, is you can't use the secondary hood latch, because like on a second gen style intercooler, the reason that this is all cut the way it was originally when we had the second gen intercooler in there is because it would come all the way up to the bottom of this basically, and there wasn't enough room for the secondary hood latch. So now with this intercooler and the way everything's positioned, we don't have to do hood pins in the hood anymore, thank God. We can just use a secondary latch, so the hood will be all stock looking just like mine. And as far as that goes, that's pretty much everything that we've done up front here that we haven't touched on since the last video. Everything fits, everything's super strong, all the intercooler piping's strong, everything's mounted solidly. I'm really happy with the way this turned out. Like I said, it looks like it's not that big a deal, but there was a lot of thought that had to go into getting all of this stuff to fit, and still being able to keep the factory grill with the inserts like I showed you. None of that's changed, so keeping that factory stock appearing look while stuffing all these performance parts in there. So the other thing we did is we kind of lowered the truck. It's not right yet, it's hard to tell, I don't have a good enough open area to walk around and show you guys, but basically we just took the blocks out of the rear and then took the front springs loose. They're just hanging, the coilovers, so that way we can kind of get an idea on ride height. And I needed to know all that for when we ordered the 9-inch for it. But the front needs to come down a little bit. I think the front will end up coming down about 1 inch, and the back's going to end up coming up about 1.5 inches to basically get it to set level, or if anything, up a little bit higher in the rear. But that brings us to the 9-inch topic. So we were originally, we were going to use a strange housing, just a stamped housing like what was in JP's truck, and then we wanted strange to build the housing as far as like put the spring perches on and the shock brackets and all that. Well, they don't really do that. If it's not a off-the-shelf deal, if it's not for a body, a G body, a specific, you know, an S10 truck, if it's not for something that they already have a jig for, they don't mess with it. It's a custom deal at that point. So then I was going to do the work, you know, because it's not that big a deal to put spring perches and shock mounts and all that on it. You know, then we'd have to put a back brace on it and stuff. It was going to take some time, you know, not anything that I couldn't handle. It's just, you know, we were looking at it from a money standpoint. We're looking at the most cost effective, and the most cost effective way would have been to have Strange do it. So we reached out to Advanced Chassis. They did the rear end, the fab rear end in my truck. They've done some other rear ends for us. They do really good work and for a really reasonable price. So we reached out to them to get a quote on what they would charge to just do us the same housing that we were going to build, but have them build it. And then in the time of that, our local powder coat guy, he quit doing powder coating. So now we were going to have to try to outsource to a powder coat shop we'd never used before. And we got the quote from Advanced Chassis, and it made sense to just use Advanced Chassis to give us a turnkey rear end. They're actually going to assemble it for us and everything. It was so cheap for them to assemble it that it wasn't even worth doing yourself. Even though a 9-inch is really easy to assemble, it's probably the easiest rear end in the world. If you already have a built third member, it's very simple. Stick the third member in, the axles, brakes, and you go. But the price was so good that it didn't make any sense for us to do it ourselves, and it'll save us a bunch of time. So they've actually built the rear end. So it's still a Strange housing, but it's got all the bells and whistles. It's back braced, shock mounts, nice spring perches, nice shock mounts actually. It's got a jack post on it, parachute, tether mounts, tie downs. It's a really nice piece, and like I said, it was for me to do it, it probably would have ended up costing more, honestly. Sometimes when you get guys that's what they do for a living, is they sit there all day and build rear ends, they can do it so much faster than you that even if their labor rate is more, it ends up saving you money in the long run. So that's all done. The housing's been done for a long time. We've got the axles. Pretty sure that he's got the brakes for it, but we've been waiting on a third member. And I guess Strange has gone through some management changes over the last 5 or 6 months that we've been trying to get this rear end. And apparently that's been causing some issues with getting parts. And then of course, parts availability changes what we were originally planning on running. We were originally going to do an Ultra third member with a 350 Pro gear, like what's in JP's truck. After talking to, well, we couldn't get it. They didn't have the 350 Pro gears. The vendor, whoever they used to get their 350 Pro gear from, didn't have any. So they said, if you can find one and send it to us, we'll build you one with your gear. Well, I couldn't find any Pro gears either. 350 is kind of a weird ratio for race car stuff. It's almost, that's kind of like street car stuff, and usually a street car doesn't need a Pro gear. And so what I mean between Pro gear and non-Pro gear is a Pro gear is made out of a softer material. So if you put it in a situation where a non-Pro gear could bust the teeth off, this will not do that. It won't fail like that. But what it will do is it will wear out, and it'll wear out a lot faster than a non-Pro gear will. I have a non-Pro gear in my third member, and so far it's been fine, but we have Pro gears in JP's, so it was kind of one of those deals where it's like, well, the Ultra case, I have a Strange HD case. JP's is an Ultra, so it was like $300 more to do the Ultra, and I was like, man, we might as well just go ahead and do the Ultra and the Pro gear, just so that way we don't have to worry about it. And seeing how long the Pro gear has lasted in JP's, we weren't really concerned about the life expectancy of it. We thought it would go plenty long. But anyways, we couldn't get the Pro gear, so then we're trying to figure out if they would build it with a non-Pro gear, because normally they won't build an Ultra without a non-Pro gear. And then I learned some stuff about third members this past week while I was out of town doing race car stuff. And we ended up just deciding to do the HD, and because they had all the stuff in stock, and they said it'll take 5 weeks to do it. All the stuff in stock, 5 weeks to build it. But that's way better than the ETA that we had before, which was no ETA. So we're gonna do a Strange HD non-pro gear, just like what's in my truck, and hopefully in about a month-ish, maybe a month and a half, we will have the rear end for that thing. I can't wait to show you guys that, because that's a really good looking rear end. It's gonna save a bunch of weight. This is gonna be really cool. So speaking of rear ends and the underside of the truck, I'll take you underneath the truck and I'll show you what I've done with the transmission crossmember and a couple things that we need to change under there. So this is the 25.4 spec transmission crossmember, and what I mean by 25.4 spec is the roll cage in this truck is a 25.4 SFI certification. So because of that, it's different than your normal 850 cage. There's actually some things beyond just the roll cage that you have to do in order for the cage to certify. So this transmission crossmember has a specific way that it has to be built. It has to be double gusseted mounting points. So basically that means that it has to have a mount on this side and then a mount on this side of it with a tube sleeve construction like this. And then, so because of that, I was able to just use the factory frame horn that came down. And then it has to be a piece of 1 5/8" tubing. And the reason that that is because in order to get the 25.4 certification of the cage, you have to tie the outriggers together for the cage. So you can, if you don't do this, you have to run a tube from the outrigger to outrigger, which means that you would have to have a tube directly underneath of this transmission pan. And then the only way to get the transmission in or out, or to service the transmission, would be you'd have to flange it and make the center of it removable. So SFI allows you, because they know that a lot of vehicles have this problem, they allow you to substitute that tube for the transmission crossmember as long as you build it exactly per their specs. And then as far as like the way you mount the transmission to the tube or your drive shaft loop, none of that matters. All they care about is that it's double gusseted at the frame rail. It's a 1 5/8" tube, and it's got a sleeve through tight fit design. Other than that, you're good to do it however you want. So just did a nice simple radius bend to a flat plate, bolts right to the back of the transmission case there. Nice and simple, nice and strong. And then this loop is removable. So these two holes here are for pins. So this loop will just come right out when you go to pull the transmission, or if you need to pull the drive shaft or anything like that. And then I'll actually throw the drive shaft in it real quick and show you guys how that all fits up. So you can see that the loop is centered in the drive shaft. This is just an old drive shaft from JP's, so it's obviously too long. The U-joints will actually be closer to the center of this hoop here, but essentially it'll be like that and just a little bit shorter. So plenty of travel for when the suspension comes up. This will get closer to this tube. So with it being about right there, that gives us plenty of up travel on the suspension. And then in the shutdown, when the front end comes down, we have plenty of up travel. So we're not going to get into anything when the suspension has its range of motions. And then just like my truck, it's super close to the transmission pan, but it's far enough away from it to where it's not going to be a problem. Even if we can get the front ride height down just a little bit, we'll have to see exactly where the ride height figures out, but regardless, everything is going to work really nice with this. And then when I put the transfer case in, I realized a issue we have here. So because the motor is moved over so far to the driver's side to accommodate everything, the rear crossmember tube that is in this, as you can see, it's pretty off-centered. It's actually off-centered enough to where you wouldn't be able to get a 4-inch drive shaft in it. So it's also really close as far as I've put a string from the pinion to here just to kind of see We won't know exactly until the 9-inch is in it, but I can tell you by looking at that the 9-inch pinion is going to be a little lower to the center of the axle line, so that's going to make this worse. So this I just think is totally wrong for the way that we have the truck set up now. So what we're going to have to do is cut this completely out of it, and then I might just flip this upside down because we have plenty of room to go up. We can go all the way up to the top of this, and then we could sneak the bend of the tube up in there. So we could do that, or I might just do a straight tube across and then put this loop on the straight tube. We'll have to see, but my next step is going to be to get to cutting that out and making it work for the setup that's in it currently. I think it probably would have been okay with the way that it was before with the 12-valve motor in it, just because everything wasn't so far to the left, but with the current setup it's pretty obvious that that's not going to work. So the next phase of this thing, after I get that transmission, or not transmission, that rear cross member fixed, like I showed you guys, I got a couple little things to do. Mount the fuel pressure regulator, not a big deal. A couple little tiny things like that. The next step will be to get to pulling the engine back out of this thing one last time. If you remember in the previous videos, I said that we had talked about painting some stuff in the frame. That's what we're going to paint some of that. I think we might repaint the firewall. There's a couple spots on it that I think that we could fix and make it just a little bit nicer. Since we're already in there, it wouldn't cost that much more to do it. So we're just going to do a couple little things like that while we have the motor out. And the other thing that we decided on is that we decided to get away from this factory vacuum booster brake setup and put a set of manual brakes on it. So basically a manual master cylinder. He's got the same brakes and hubs for the front of it that I run on mine, and then in the rear it'll have the strange dual calipers. So it'll have, you know, basically the same stopping power that mine has and same stopping power that JP's truck has. So since we've been having such good luck with both of those trucks, we can save weight and clean up this engine compartment by getting rid of the vacuum setup. We're also going to have to run an electronically controlled vacuum, like booster pump setup to make the vacuum for this. And it's just like, man, why add another thing to it? You know, this is going to be a trans brake truck, so it's not like you're super concerned about staging. You know, like it's not like it needs to hold back 25 pounds of boost on the foot brake on the starting line. So as long as it stops fine, it's not a big deal. And with the way that I've been staging my truck, I've been, you know, I can make pretty much whatever boost I want on the foot brakes. So the brakes we have, they work really good. So we're going to do the exact same setup on this, clean up that firewall, get some weight out of it, and we'll do that once we pull the motor out. That's when we'll go in and do that. And then, like I said, a couple things like that hole over there for the factory fuse box, it needs to go. The point of a firewall is to keep fire out. So per NHRA rules, you're not supposed to have any holes or openings in your firewall. So keep that in mind when you guys are doing your trucks, that if you're going to be like serious about racing these things, or honestly just in general, it's a good safety thing to make sure that it's a firewall for a reason. It's to keep the fire out. So if you think fire can get through, address it. You know, it's a safety thing. And then, like I said, once we get the motor out, I'll get all this stuff painted. That's going to be our next step. Next step is get the motor out, get this master cylinder and all that off. I will show you guys how I do the manual brakes. It's really super simple on these things. And then we'll get the frame repainted in the front. We'll go ahead and run the brake lines probably while the engine's out, just to make it easier. And then hopefully we'll get the rear end by that point, and then we'll get the rear end in the truck, and then we'll start putting all this stuff back in it once and for all. I still have quite a bit of fab work left to do to it. I've got to mount the throttle pedal, I've got to mount the smart wire, I've got to mount the ECM. I've got stuff that I have to do inside the truck fab wise. I still have to mount the master shutoff. They're changing the battery up. We're putting one of my batteries in it. So We're changing some stuff up on it, so, which is going to require a little bit of fab work, but the main next step is to take all this stuff back out, get everything painted, put all this stuff back in, and hopefully, if everything goes well, we should be about done with the hard to get parts. I don't think there's anything else that we need that we can't get. We've already got the front hubs. Wheels and tires will be the very last thing. Honestly, the truck needs to run and drive before we're putting wheels and tires on it, just because there's no reason to spend that money yet, and there's definitely no reason to buy tires if it's just going to sit around. Don't buy tires for your truck if you're 6 months, 8 months, a year out with it, because they can go bad, especially if it's a bias ply. Don't leave the truck sitting on the tires a lot, especially not for that kind of time period. They will flat spot. So we're gonna get all that part of it done, and hopefully, fingers crossed, everything goes well, stars and moon align. I'll have this thing done, at least my part of it done, by winter time. Before the snow flies is my plan, would be to get this thing done, get it back to Jordan so he can finish a little bit of plumbing, a little bit of wiring, and pretty much he can get it 100% race ready to where come springtime he can actually take this thing out, and then we'll do a bunch of videos talking about the suspension, stuff that I just think that you guys could find helpful with your leaf spring truck stuff. So stick around for that. We got plenty more videos coming in with this thing. The videos for this are going to be hit or miss as far as timeline goes, just because of waiting on parts, just because it is kind of an in-between project for when I'm not super busy with transmission builds. But I will keep the content of this truck coming to you guys as soon as I possibly can. So, like always, I appreciate you watching. If you want to stay up to date on this kind of stuff, if this is what you like and subscribe. If you click that bell icon, that'll notify you every time I post a new video, and that's the easiest way for you guys to stay up to date with what I'm doing. So, appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the next one.